In the world of the elite, where the walls of vast estates hide secrets darker than any imagination, a twisted story unfolded within the Shirazi family, a story that would remain untold if not for a few fateful mistakes. At 22, Amina El-Aziz had walked into a life of wealth and privilege when she married Zain Shirazi, the son of billionaire businessman Alastair Shirazi. They had met young, back in high school, and had quickly become inseparable, their connection as deep as it was pure. Amina saw Zain's family as an extension of her own, viewing Alastair as a second father figure who had graciously supported her relationship with Zain over the years. But wealth and privilege come with a price. Amina soon realized that Alastair's kindness was not born of goodwill, but of a carefully orchestrated manipulation. What she thought was the life of her dreams turned into a nightmarish prison. Within months of their marriage, Zain suffered a debilitating accident, leaving him confined to begin to impose his twisted power over Amina, seeing her not as his son's wife, but as a possession he could control. Amina was trapped between her loyalty to her husband and Alastair's suffocating influence. Her nightmare deepened as she tried to keep her dignity while enduring the daily manipulation Alastair subjected her to. But the arrival of a new housekeeper, Omar, offered her a glimmer of hope, a confidant who uncovered the secrets she kept hidden and ultimately exposed a terrifying plan. When the truth was unveiled, it wasn't just Amina's dignity, but her life on the line. Years before Amina's world crumbled under Alastair's grip, she was a girl who dreamed big in a modest neighborhood. Her family, though not wealthy, valued education, resilience, and self-respect. She met Zain Shirazi in high school, a young man whose presence exuded a quiet confidence and kindness that set him apart from his peers. Zain, unlike the other students, treated people with a respect that earned him admiration without arrogance. They met during a school event, exchanging glances across the auditorium, a silent acknowledgement of mutual curiosity. Zain's background couldn't have been more different from Amina's. He was the son of one of the wealthiest men in the city, raised in a world of luxury and privilege. Yet he was unpretentious, drawn to Amina's wit and authenticity. They shared common interests, literature, art, and a vision of life that wasn't tied to wealth, but to purpose and integrity. As they grew closer, Amina became a fixture at the Shirazi estate, welcomed by Zain's mother and cautiously observed by Alastair, matched only by his shrewdness. Known for his extensive business empire, he moved through life with a commanding presence that drew both respect and fear. Despite his wealth and influence, Alastair kept his personal life well guarded, and although he treated Amina with kindness, there was a cold calculation behind his eyes. He observed her interactions with Zain, occasionally pulling her aside to ask polite but probing questions about her family, her aspirations, and her intentions. In those moments, Amina felt a quiet discomfort, a sense that she was being assessed, weighed, and measured. Yet she dismissed it, attributing her unease to the natural intimidation one might feel around someone of Alastair's stature. Zain, unaware of his father's hidden agendas, continued to defend his relationship with Amina, arguing that she brought out the best in him. Alastair seemed to accept this, even supporting Zain's choice, but there was an unspoken tension, a flicker of something darker in his eyes. When Zain proposed to Amina at 21, Alastair's support was unexpected yet enthusiastically given. He offered to host a grand engagement party, arranging for an exclusive celebration on the estate's expansive grounds. Amina was swept into a world of opulence, her modest dreams suddenly within reach, her future intertwined with a family that promised both security and status. She believed she was fortunate, blessed even, to be accepted so warmly by Zain's family. Yet behind Alastair's welcoming smile, there lay a deeper intent. Amina, unknowingly, relationship exploited, every weakness observed. And in that meticulously controlled universe, Alastair held all the cards, setting the stage for a tragedy she could never have anticipated. A few months into their marriage, tragedy struck in the form of a devastating car accident. Zain, who had gone out to run errands one evening, lost control of his car on a winding road, veering off into a ditch. The news reached Amina within hours, delivered by one of Alastair's security team. She rushed to the hospital, her heart pounding with fear and desperation, praying that Zain's injuries were not severe. But the reality was grim. Zain's injuries left him paralyzed from the waist down, his spine damaged in a way that rendered him wheelchair-bound, likely for the rest of his life. The carefree, active man she had married was now reliant on constant at his side, determined to support him through his rehabilitation, but the weight of their circumstances was overwhelming. Every day was a new struggle, their life together reshaped by the limitations of his physical condition. Alistair, however, was unfazed. He handled the situation with cold efficiency, arranging for the best medical care, ensuring that Zayn had every possible resource at his disposal. He even offered to move Zayn and Amina into a separate wing of the estate, granting them privacy and the support of a dedicated nursing staff. Amina initially saw this as a generous gesture, but the isolation soon felt stifling. Alistair's presence was constant, and she began to feel as though he was using Zayn's condition to exert control over her, his gaze lingering on her longer than before, his conversations with her taking on a suggestive undertone. In the months following the accident, Zayn's dependence on Alistair's wealth deepened. He required specialized equipment, his control expanding beyond financial matters and into their personal lives. Amina, caught between her love for Zayn and her discomfort with Alistair's growing involvement, tried to ignore the encroaching sense of unease. She buried her feelings, convincing herself that Alistair's intentions were rooted in concern rather than manipulation. Yet late at night, as she lay beside Zayn, she could not shake the feeling that Alistair's generosity came with hidden costs. She sensed his eyes on her, felt the subtle pressure of his presence. She began to notice small things, like how Alistair would wait until Zayn was asleep to speak with her, or how his hand would linger a moment too long when he touched her shoulder in passing. These moments, though fleeting, the accident that had bound Amina and Zayn together now served as the foundation of a new reality, one where Alistair's influence permeated every aspect of their lives. Amina's once idyllic marriage was overshadowed by a man who saw her vulnerability as an opportunity. She was trapped, her every move confined within the walls of the Shirazi estate, and the realization gnawed at her, threatening to consume the love she had once believed would protect her. Amina tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy in the wake of Zayn's accident, taking on the duties that he could no longer perform, determined to create a life that was still theirs. She would bring Zayn his meals, help him with his daily routines, and read to him from the books they had once shared. But Zayn's confinement took a toll on his spirit. He became withdrawn, his laughter fading into a quiet resignation. He would visit them in the evenings, ostensibly to check on Zayn, but his conversations increasingly directed themselves toward Amina. Alistair's interest, at first casual, grew into something more intimate, more possessive. He would speak of his late wife, contrasting her beauty with Amina's, mentioning how Amina had an air of sophistication that reminded him of his younger days. She would brush these comments aside, attributing them to misguided attempts at flattery. But one night, Alistair's demeanor shifted. He asked Amina to meet him in his private study, claiming Zayn had already gone to bed, his pain medication leaving him sedated, and Amina saw no harm in answering Alistair's summons. The study was dimly lit, its walls lined with leather-bound books and portraits of ancestors gazing down with cold, calculating eyes. Alistair sat behind his large mahogany desk, his posture relaxed, his gaze intent as Amina entered. He invited her to sit, gesturing to a seat across from him. As she sat down, she noticed how his eyes lingered on her, the faintest smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Alistair began by discussing the estate's finances, informing her of changes in Zayn's inheritance due to his accident and how certain assets would be held in trust under Alistair's control. She listened, uneasy but nodding, not fully understanding the implications. He then pivoted, his voice lowering as he complimented her loyalty, her strength, her beauty, qualities he claimed were rare in a world of wealth and power. He praised her devotion to Zayn, mentioning he murmured her gratitude, hoping to end the conversation. But Alistair leaned forward, his eyes sharp and unyielding. He reached out, placing his hand over hers on the armrest, his touch cold and firm. A chill ran through her, but she didn't pull away, afraid of showing fear. He squeezed her hand gently, his gaze unrelenting as he told her that he too admired her greatly, that she had become a valued addition to the Shirazi family. There was no mistaking the implication in his words, and the realization struck her like a blow. She felt a rush of panic, but forced herself to remain calm, pulling her hand back slowly, She told him in a steady voice that she needed to check on Zayn, excusing herself with forced politeness. Alistair watched her leave, a smile that was neither kind nor comforting, etched an oppressive feeling that she was trapped, alone, with nowhere to turn. In the following weeks, Alistair's advances became more frequent, more deliberate. He would find reasons to call her into his study, or to brush his hand against hers as they passed each other in the hallway. She tried to avoid him, making excuses to stay in Zayn's room or occupy herself with errands outside the estate. But despite her efforts, Alistair's presence loomed over her life with a suffocating intensity. His subtle touches, lingering glances, and veiled compliments were constant reminders of his power over her, a power that extended far beyond financial dependence. He orchestrated their interactions with calculated precision, ensuring that she remained within reach, bound by a web of duty to Zayn and helplessness in the face of Alistair's influence. When Amina did manage to escape the estate for brief errands, she felt a fleeting sense of freedom. She would walk aimlessly through the... She knew that upon returning home, she would once again face Alistair's unyielding presence. One evening, Alistair invited her to a private dinner in his study, stating that it was an important family gathering in Zayn's honor. But when Amina arrived, she found herself alone with Alistair. He had dimmed the lights, set a small table with 2 place settings, and poured a glass of wine for her. She felt the subtle intimidation of his gaze as he raised his glass, toasting to the future of the family. There was no pretense of formality, no mention of Zayn or the estate. Alistair's intentions were as clear as the cold crystal in her hand. As they ate in strained silence, he spoke of his late wife, praising her grace and obedience, and suggesting that she had understood her duties within the family. The insinuation was unmistakable. She realized that Alistair didn't see her as his son's wife, but as another acquisition, a prize to control and mold. Amina endured the dinner, her mind racing with a torrent of emotions, anger, fear, and helplessness. She wanted to shout, to confront him, to tell him she would never submit to his perverse expectations. But the reality of her situation silenced her. Alistair held all the power. He controlled the finances, her living arrangements, and even Zayn's medical care. Any protest could result in retaliation that would leave both her and Zayn vulnerable. After the dinner, she returned to her quarters, feeling hollow and defeated. Zayn, who was in bed and unaware of his father's advances, looked at her with the familiar affection that had once filled her with happiness. But now, that affection felt fragile, overshadowed by the darkness looming within the estate's walls. She lay awake beside him, her mind heavy with dread, knowing that as long as she remained in Alistair's world, she would be... That followed were a slow, agonizing descent into isolation. Alistair's control tightened around Amina's life like a vice. He began issuing demands under the guise of family obligations, insisting that she assist him with estate affairs, often late into the evening. He would summon her with excuses that felt thin and forced, a document needing review, a decision about an investment. And each time he pushed the boundaries further. Amina was careful to maintain her composure, aware that any outburst would only strengthen Alistair's hold over her. She hid her discomfort, meeting his advances with feigned politeness, her emotions concealed beneath a calm facade. But inwardly, she was unraveling a sense of vulnerability, an awareness that Alistair viewed her as something he owned, a trophy rather than a person. Her isolation grew deeper as Alistair began restricting her outside activities. He discouraged her from visiting friends or family, suggesting that her responsibilities on the estate should be her priority. Whenever she attempted to leave, Alistair would remind her of Zayn's dependency, implying that her absence could put Zayn's care at risk. He wielded her love for Zayn as a weapon, using it to ensure her compliance, and each reminder drove her further into despair. The estate itself became a cage, its grandeur and luxury a mockery of her captivity. Amina wandered the halls, her movements monitored by Alistair's ever-watchful staff, who reported back to him with unwavering influence extended to every corner of the estate, and she could feel his presence in every room, every shadow. But despite her efforts to keep the truth hidden, her inner turmoil did not go unnoticed. Omar, a young housekeeper who had recently joined the staff, began to sense the tension that simmered beneath the surface of Amina's interactions with Alistair. Omar was observant, quiet, and seemed to possess a sensitivity that set him apart from the other staff members. He watched Amina with a subtle understanding, recognizing the strain she carried, the flickers of distress that crossed her face when she thought no one was looking. One afternoon, while tidying up the library, Omar found Amina sitting alone, her posture tense, her expression distant. He approached her cautiously, offering a polite smile, his tone gentle as he inquired if she needed anything. Amina, caught off guard by his kindness, hesitated before offering a quiet, "No," but something in her voice betrayed her vulnerability. Omar continued his work in silence. He became her confidant in small, unspoken ways, offering her the comfort of his silent understanding. She sensed that he knew more than he let on, that he had pieced together fragments of her predicament without her having to say a word. One day, while they were alone, Omar subtly hinted at his awareness, mentioning how he had noticed the unique dynamic between her and Alistair. His words were carefully chosen, but Amina felt the weight of his implication. She met his gaze, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them, a recognition of the darkness they both perceived, the danger that lurked within the estate. Amina knew that her secret was no longer entirely her own, that Omar had glimpsed the shadow of her struggle, and though she feared the implications of his knowledge, she also felt a flicker of relief, a sense that she was not entirely alone. Yet she was painfully aware that if Alistair discovered Omar's awareness, the consequences could be dire. From that day forward, Amina and Omar shared a quiet alliance, a bond forged in secrecy and unspoken fears. She felt a sense of walking a dangerous line, one that Alistair's wrath could sever at any moment. Over time, Omar's presence became a small but essential comfort in Amina's life. He was the only person she felt she could trust, the only person who saw through the facade she maintained under Alistair's watchful eye. Amina was cautious with her words, careful not to reveal too much, but Omar's perceptiveness meant that he rarely needed direct answers. He could see the strain etched on her face, the shadows that deepened in her eyes each time she returned from one of Alistair's meetings. One afternoon, while she sat in the estate's garden attempting to enjoy a rare moment of solitude, Omar appeared. He offered her a quiet nod of acknowledgement before asking if she needed anything. She shook her head, grateful for his presence but unwilling to speak openly. They sat in companionable silence. Omar spoke. "You don't deserve this, Mrs. Shirazi," he said, his words weighted with meaning. The simplicity of his statement broke down the barriers she had built around herself. For the first time since the nightmare with Alistair began, she felt seen, not as a dutiful wife, not as an object of control, but as a person bearing the weight of another's manipulation. Unable to hold back, Amina whispered, He doesn't care about anyone but himself, Omar. Not even Zayn." Her voice trembled as she spoke, the resentment and sorrow she had kept buried finally surfacing. She explained, in fragmented sentences, how Alistair's kindness had always been a cover, a way to assert control over her life and Zayn's. Omar listened without interruption, his expression growing darker as he began to understand the full extent of Alistair's actions. Omar told her then, in a low voice, that he had noticed Alistair's manipulative behavior, the way he monitored everyone within the estate. He admitted that he suspected something was wrong, that he had overheard bits and pieces of Alistair's of what they had shared. For the first time, Amina felt that she wasn't entirely powerless, that she wasn't alone in her struggle. Omar's understanding gave her a glimmer of hope, a sense that perhaps, together, they could find a way to protect themselves from Alistair's relentless grasp. But their connection was short-lived, and their moment of solace quickly turned to fear. Unbeknownst to them, Alistair had grown suspicious of their bond, noticing how Omar seemed to linger near Amina, how he watched her with a subtle protectiveness. Alistair, ever vigilant, sensed that his control over Amina was slipping, and he began to suspect that Omar had uncovered his secrets. The moment Alistair sensed that Omar posed a threat to his authority, he began devising a plan to eliminate him. Alistair was a man accustomed to removing obstacles without hesitation. Alistair approached the task with the same meticulous precision he applied to his business dealings. He began by gathering information about Omar, his background, his family, and any vulnerabilities he might exploit. Through his connections, Alistair uncovered that Omar's mother depended on his income to survive, a piece of information he would use to manipulate the young housekeeper into submission if necessary. One evening, Alistair summoned Omar to his office under the pretense of discussing work duties. The atmosphere in the room was tense, the air thick with an unspoken threat, as Alistair sat behind his desk, his eyes cold and assessing. He began by questioning Omar about his responsibilities, his interactions with Amina, and his observations around the estate. Omar, sensing the danger, maintained a neutral tone, answering in short, polite responses. Alistair's questions grew more probing, his insinuations sharper. He hinted that loyalty was a quality he valued, that any disloyalty would be dealt with severely, and any misstep would have consequences. As the days passed, Alistair's demeanor became increasingly hostile. He would issue orders with a sharp tone, calling Omar at odd hours, forcing him to work long shifts, and assigning him menial, exhausting tasks. He used his power to wear Omar down, a form of psychological intimidation meant to reinforce his dominance. But Omar endured, refusing to give in to Alistair's intimidation tactics. He held on, driven by his determination to protect Amina, even if it meant facing Alistair's wrath. He sensed that Alistair was testing him, waiting for him to break, to give up. But Omar's resolve remained firm, his loyalty to Amina outweighing any fear he had of Alistair. Alistair, frustrated by Omar's resilience, escalated his efforts. He arranged a carefully orchestrated plan to remove Omar permanently. He waited until late one night, instructing Omar to perform a task in a secluded part of the estate grounds. It was a setup. Grew increasingly anxious. She tried to warn Omar, but her efforts were thwarted by Alistair's watchful eye. She spent sleepless nights fearing for Omar's life, her heart racing with dread as she imagined what Alistair might do if he discovered their alliance. Then one night, the inevitable happened. Omar failed to return from his task, and Amina's worst fears were realized. She rushed to the estate grounds, her heart pounding as she searched for any sign of him. But her search ended in despair when she found him lying at the bottom of a stone stairwell, his body still and unmoving. The scene was eerily quiet, the shadows of the night casting a grim silence over his lifeless form. Alistair quickly declared the incident an accident, issuing orders to have Omar's body removed and buried without delay. The staff, bound by their loyalty and fear of Alistair, followed his instructions without question. But Amina knew the truth. She knew that Omar's death was no accident, that it was the result of Alistair's relentless need for control. Allah robbed her of even the smallest comfort, leaving her isolated once again, bound by secrets that could never be spoken. But her grief was accompanied by a quiet determination. Omar's death had revealed the depths of Alistair's cruelty, the lengths he would go to protect his power. And Amina knew that if she wanted to survive, if she wanted to escape the clutches of the man who controlled her life, she would need to find a way to expose his secrets. She would need to fight, not just for herself, but for the memory of the one person who had risked everything to stand by her side. In the days following Omar's tragic death, the Shirazi estate was wrapped in an uneasy silence. Alistair carried on as though nothing had happened, moving through his daily routine with an unbothered ease that sickened Amina. For her, the air was thick with grief and anger, her mind tormented by the knowledge that Omar's death was no accident. Despite Alistair's attempts to sweep the incident under the rug, Amina couldn't ignore the unsettling atmosphere that had settled over the estate. The staff moved in a cautious manner, their faces guarded, their words careful. Rumors circulated quietly among the servants, whispers of how Alistair had grown suspicious of Omar's connection with Amina, how the young man's unexpected death seemed too convenient to be a coincidence. But no one dared speak openly, too fearful of Alistair's wrath. Amina, trapped by her own fear and helplessness, was haunted by the memory of her last conversation with Omar, his quiet words of support, his willingness to risk everything to help her. She felt a profound sense of guilt, believing that she had somehow led him to his death, that her silent pleas for help had put him in Alistair's crosshairs. Her days became a blur of sorrow, her nights spent in restless dreams, plagued by visions of Omar's final moments. One evening, a few days had been assigned to look into Omar's death, an assignment she approached with her characteristic thoroughness. She was a woman of calm composure, her sharp eyes and quick mind taking in the estate's opulence with a practiced detachment. Delaney's initial impression of the Shirazi family was one of unease. The grandeur of the estate seemed hollow, its beauty masking a darkness she could sense but not yet see. She interviewed Alistair first, her questions polite but probing, her tone respectful but unyielding. Alistair, accustomed to controlling every situation, answered with confidence, deflecting her questions with practiced ease. He described Omar's death as a tragic accident, expressing condolences in a tone that struck Delaney as insincere. When Delaney moved on to interview Amina, she noted the young woman's visible distress, her voice barely above a whisper as she spoke of Omar, attempting to put Amina at ease, but Amina remained cautious, too afraid of the consequences of speaking openly. Despite Amina's reticence, Delaney could see that there was more to the story. She noted the way Amina's hands trembled, her gaze darting anxiously as though expecting Alistair to appear at any moment. She realized that Amina's fear went beyond simple grief. It was the fear of someone who knew too much, someone trapped in a web of secrets. Delaney's instincts sharpened, her suspicions confirmed. Omar's death was no accident, and the truth was buried somewhere within the walls of the Shirazi estate. Determined to uncover the truth, Delaney began a comprehensive investigation, poring over every detail of the estate, questioning the staff, and examining any evidence she could find. Her inquiries revealed subtle inconsistencies that hinted at a darker reality beneath Alistair's polished exterior. The staff were tight-lipped, their loyalty to Alistair evident, but their silence only fueled her determination. She sensed that fear was the true master of the Shirazi estate, a fear that kept everyone under Alistair's control. One of the first clues she uncovered was a discrepancy in the estate's security footage. Maintenance, a coincidence that struck Delaney as far too convenient. Her suspicions grew as she examined Omar's daily schedule, noting the unusual task that had taken him to the remote stairwell where he had fallen. Delaney also discovered a series of text messages on Omar's phone, messages that revealed his cautious but growing friendship with Amina. Although the messages were innocuous, she sensed that they hinted at a bond forged under pressure, a connection born from a shared understanding of Alistair's oppressive presence. The messages fueled Delaney's theory that Omar had become involved in something beyond his control, a situation that had ultimately cost him his life. During her investigation, Delaney spent more time with Amina, gradually earning her trust. She could see that Amina was weighed down by secrets, the burden of knowledge visible in her weary gaze. With each meeting, she revealed fragments of the horrors she endured, the quiet terror of living under Alistair's control, and the subtle but relentless pressure he exerted on her life. It wasn't until one evening, when Amina found herself alone with Delaney, that she finally allowed herself to speak freely. She told Delaney about the strange dinners with Alistair, the unspoken threats, and his inappropriate advances. She confessed her fear for her own life, her isolation, and the helplessness that had driven her to confide in Omar. As she spoke, her voice shook with suppressed emotion, her grief for Omar interwoven with a desperate plea for justice. Delaney listened intently, her own resolve hardening as she absorbed the gravity of Amina's words. She assured Amina that she would find a way to protect her, that she would uncover the truth, no matter how deeply Alistair had buried it. Delaney knew that her path forward was fraught with obstacles, that Alistair's influence extended far beyond the estate, but she was undeterred. The knowledge that Omar had been silenced only strengthened her determination. As her investigation deepened, Delaney uncovered additional pieces of evidence that pointed to Alistair's involvement in Omar's death. The fabric matched Omar's uniform, suggesting that he may have struggled before his fatal fall. Delaney's next step was to examine Alistair's phone records, searching for any incriminating communication in the days leading up to Omar's death. What she found was a pattern of calls made to a private number, a number registered to an investigator Alistair had employed in the past for discreet matters. Although the content of the calls remained unknown, the timing was suspicious, each call aligning with key moments in her investigation, suggesting that Alistair had been orchestrating events from behind the scenes. But Delaney's most crucial discovery came from an unexpected source, a former estate employee who had once worked closely with Alistair. This employee, now retired, agreed to meet with Delaney in secret, revealing a history of Alistair's manipulative tactics, his penchant for control, and his ability to remove threats with a ruthless efficiency. The former employee described Alastair's influence over the estate, his tendency to micromanage, and the calculated measures he took to maintain his reputation timeline that linked Alastair to Omar's death. She presented her findings to her superiors, who, recognizing the strength of her case, authorized her to pursue further action. She knew that her next steps would be crucial, that Alastair's reaction would reveal his true intentions. Her instincts told her that the man she was dealing with was not one to go down without a fight. Delaney decided to confront Alastair directly, confident that the evidence she had gathered was enough to unsettle him. She approached him with her usual composure, her questions pointed but calm. She referenced the fabric at the scene, the suspicious phone calls, and the gaps in the security footage. Each mention of evidence seemed to chip away at Alastair's carefully maintained facade, his confidence beginning to waver. When Delaney mentioned the retired employee's statements, Alastair's expression shifted, a flash of anger breaking the defensive. She knew she was close to forcing him into a mistake, close to unraveling the tightly wound threads of his deceit. Determined to hold him accountable, Delaney intensified her questioning, applying pressure with each piece of evidence, every inconsistency she could exploit. She could feel Alastair's control slipping, his attempts to maintain his innocence becoming increasingly desperate. She knew it was only a matter of time before his defenses collapsed, revealing the truth he had fought so hard to hide. Detective Nora Delaney's final confrontation with Alastair Shirazi was a pivotal moment, one she had carefully orchestrated after weeks of meticulous investigation. Every piece of evidence she had gathered led her here, to a showdown with a man accustomed to manipulating his way out of any situation. She knew that Alastair's defenses were as formidable as his resources, but Delaney was prepared, armed with facts, observations, and the subtle admissions she had elicited from him over time. The meeting took place in the Grand Library of the Shirazi estate. Alastair sat at the head of a long face of contempt, as though he viewed her as nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Delaney took a seat across from him, laying her files on the table, each document and photograph a testament to his hidden life. She began by reviewing the findings from the stairwell where Omar had died, listing each detail as methodically as she could. She described the fabric that had been found snagged near the steps, the gaps in the estate's security footage, and the mysterious calls Alastair had made to a private number linked to a known fixer. She spoke of these findings with the precision of someone accustomed to piecing together puzzles, and with each point, she watched Alastair's expression subtly shift. Alastair, for his part, denied everything. His tone was measured, his responses polished. He claimed that the gaps in the security footage were unfortunate coincidence, the phone calls a mere business matter. He dismissed the fabric as circumstantial, implying that Delaney's evidence was nothing more than speculation. But Delaney could sense the tension beneath his calm exterior. The way his hand clenched, Mina had recounted, the family obligations Alastair had imposed, the inappropriate advances that had escalated into coercion. Delaney described how Amina had been isolated within the estate, subjected to Alastair's influence and silenced by his threats. Her words were laced with an unmistakable undertone of accusation, one that cut through Alastair's defenses and struck at his carefully constructed facade. Alastair's composure began to crack. His responses became defensive, his voice sharper, his gaze narrowing with a flash of anger. He attempted to shift the blame, claiming that Amina was unstable, that she had imagined the threats, the advances, even her friendship with Omar. But Delaney had anticipated this tactic, and she responded with unwavering calm, her focus fixed on the truth that lay beneath his denials. In a final, calculated move, Delaney, a testament to the isolation she had endured. She placed the photograph on the table, her gaze locked with Alastair's, and waited. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken implications, until Alastair finally looked away, his control slipping as he realized the depth of Delaney's understanding. "You don't know anything about my family, detective," he spat, his tone laced with bitterness. But Delaney's expression remained steady, her resolve unshaken. She knew she had struck a nerve, that Alastair's carefully guarded world was beginning to unravel. After the confrontation in the library, Delaney's strategy was simple. She continued to press, to probe, to unsettle Alastair in ways he had never been unsettled before. She contacted colleagues who had dealt with Alastair in business disputes, piecing together a pattern of manipulation and coercion that extended far beyond his dealings with Amina and Omar. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became at arm's length. Alistair, sensing his grip slipping, attempted to counter Delaney's investigation by leveraging his connections. He contacted attorneys, instructed his private investigator to discredit Amina, even attempted to bribe one of Delaney's colleagues. But Delaney's superiors backed her every step of the way, ensuring that her investigation remained protected from Alistair's influence. As Delaney tightened her net around Alistair, he grew increasingly isolated, his usual sources of support dwindling as more people came to realize the extent of his crimes. It was then that Delaney made her final move. She visited him at his estate one last time, armed with a recording she had obtained from a former employee. A recording that captured a heated conversation in which Alistair had discussed taking care of Omar. She played the recording, watching as Alistair's face drained of color, his composure shattering as the implications sank in. He stammered, his empire of lies collapsing around him. In a moment of desperation, Alistair lashed out, his words laced with venom as he accused Amina of betrayal, of weakness, of bringing outsiders into his carefully controlled world. He spoke with a bitterness that revealed the true extent of his resentment, his inability to see Amina as anything other than a possession he had lost control over. As Delaney listened, she realized that Alistair's downfall was rooted not just in his crimes, but in his inability to view others as individuals. He had seen Amina as an extension of his empire, Omar as an obstacle to be removed, his own son as a pawn in his game. His confession was not just an admission of guilt, but a testament to the emptiness of his power, a power built on fear and control rather than respect or loyalty. When Alistair finished, he slumped back in his chair, his once commanding presence reduced to a shadow. Delaney met his gaze, her expression one of quiet triumph as she informed him that his confession had been the evidence that would bring him down. Alistair Shirazi's arrest sent shockwaves through his family, the estate, and the broader community. The man who had once held unyielding control over his world was now exposed, his crimes laid bare for all to see. The trial that followed was a media sensation. Each detail of his manipulation, his cruelty, his role in Omar's death revealed to a horrified public. Amina attended the trial, her presence a silent testament to the strength she had found in the face of Alistair's control. She watched as each witness took the stand, as Delaney presented the evidence she had gathered, as Alistair's former allies distanced themselves from him. Her grief for Omar lingered, a quiet sorrow that would never fully fade, but it was accompanied by a sense of closure, a belief that justice was finally being served. Delaney's work on the case was widely praised, her tenacity and insight lauded by her colleagues and the public alike, lay beneath his wealth and influence. The case was a reminder to her that justice, though often elusive, was worth pursuing, even in the face of opposition. For Amina, life after Alistair's conviction was one of cautious rebuilding. She returned to her family, finding solace in the familiarity of her childhood home. She remained close to Zain, visiting him regularly, their bond one of mutual respect and quiet understanding. Zain, who had once been an unwitting pawn in his father's schemes, now faced his own journey of healing, determined to overcome the shadow of his father's legacy. In time, Amina found ways to honor Omar's memory, creating a foundation in his name dedicated to supporting individuals facing abuse and isolation. She poured her energy into the foundation, using her experience to help others break free from the chains of the Shirazi estate. Once a symbol of power and wealth, stood empty, its halls filled with echoes of a man who had believed himself untouchable. The opulence and grandeur of the mansion were now hollow, its beauty marred by the darkness that had once thrived within its walls. Alistair's legacy, once revered, was now tainted, a cautionary tale of greed, control, and the ultimate downfall that awaited those who viewed others as mere possessions. Detective Nora Delaney, though proud of her work, remained humbled by the case. She knew that justice, while served, could never erase the pain inflicted on Amina, the life stolen from Omar, or the scars left on those Alistair had manipulated. But she found solace in the knowledge that she had helped expose the truth, that she had given Amina a chance to reclaim her life, to find a path forward unmarred by fear. In the end, the Shirazi family's legacy was rewritten, not by the wealth or power Alistair had amassed, but by the resilience of those he had tried to control. Amina, through her strength and determination, had turned the darkest chapter of her life into a story of survival, a testament to the unbreakable spirit that had withstood even the most insidious of adversaries.